All right, so we talked about the concept of space, and we created space with overlapping, scale, and focus. Now we're going to learn a little bit more advanced way of creating a sense of space or depth, and that is perspective. Okay. Let's talk about perspective drawing. Perspective is a system for representing objects as they get further and further away from the human eye. Okay. So the way that it works is there's this idea that there's this all objects go back into space, like physically go back. Like, let me see if I can do a good example for you guys. Let's pretend I'm looking best. It's easiest to see with like a box. Let me use this box here. Okay. And let me see if I can, I'm going to do a 1-point perspective here. And what's happening here is if there's the part that is, this part is flat to you guys, the camera, but there's this part here that's going back into space. These are the depth lines. This is, width, height, and then there's depth, okay? And the idea with perspective drawing is that the depth of your objects go back in space, and they go towards something called the horizon line. The idea with the horizon line is imagine like you were in the desert where there's not like a bunch of tall buildings or something like that, not a lot of trees. You can see all the way to the curvature of the earth. Okay, that is the horizon line. Okay. So the idea is that in perspective drawing, depth lines go towards the horizon. Okay. And there's also this idea that the depth lines eventually meet or converge, as we would say. Okay. So it's kind of hard to do here, but it's like, see how like this, even though in real life, these are parallel to each other, when I hold it like this, roughly, they're parallel. But when I do this, the depth lines kind of go backwards, right? And they go a little bit inward, okay? Eventually, if those lines kept going, they would touch each other. They would meet or converge. That point at which they meet, we refer to that as a vanishing point. Okay. Now, all of these are just kind of like, they don't really exist in real life. They're kind of a concept. There are no like, quote unquote, you can't point to a vanishing point as like a point on the earth because it's all based on human perspective. But that is kind of the idea. So Leonardo da Vinci, the famous Renaissance guy, he was kind of the person who sort of founded this idea. Might be hard to see here, but it's kind of this idea that like all of these floorboards are kind of all going backwards in space. And they're all kind of converging about there. Okay. So it's like, and here's like the stairs, all the stairs as they go back are converging towards that one line. So if I was like drawing these lines, it's, oops, these lines are kind of, these are like the floorboards here. They're all kind of converging roughly about there, give or take. Okay. I might be a little bit off, but you get the idea. And like all of these depth lines of the stairs are all kind of going towards that one line. Even here, it's like these lines of this like column, they're all going towards that point. This is the vanishing point. We'll see some better examples, but this is like his work, Leonardo da Vinci's, but we'll look at some stuff that's a little bit more easy to look at. Okay. So here's an example. The horizon line is where everything goes towards. Okay. So the horizon line here is like, you can never meet the horizon. As soon as you get towards the horizon, there's a new horizon. But it's like you're always going towards the horizon. Okay. In this case, the horizon line is like here. And then all of the lines, like, you can watch as the depth of the street lines. Yeah, those street lines and even like the dash lines, they're all going towards this one point, which is about roughly there. Okay. So this is where everything kind of meets up. And remember, all of your depth lines go towards the horizon. So even though this is above the horizon line, but see how it's still going down? So even though this is like the depth of the buildings, right? And they're still going towards the horizon and they're going towards that vanishing point. Even some objects that you don't necessarily have depth. Remember I talked about like how when an object is in the distance and it's smaller, we assume that it's a sign of depth, right? We did that with the two squares. Well, not only that, you can have your objects follow perspective. So when we look at these trees here, we assume that the trees are the same size. Now, granted, we don't know that they're the same size. They may not be. But look, we assume, okay, these two trees are the same size. So if this is getting smaller, it's actually a sign of depth. And see how the lines of the tops of the trees are going towards that vanishing point? Same thing with the bottoms of the trees. They're all pointing towards that vanishing point. So that helps the objects look a little more realistic. Okay. So let's try this out. I already did an example that you can kind of take a look at. And I'm going to show how we could do this kind of concept pretty easily, or not easily, but it's not hard to do it. So I'm going to go to my work layer. This is exercise 2. And what I'm going to do is like literally draw a horizon line. Okay. In this case, I'm going to make the horizon line red just for the sake of this. Okay. You can play around with thickness in the properties panel. And I'm going to grab a circle. And the vanishing point has to be somewhere, your vanishing point or points, we'll talk about that, have to always be on the horizon line. And I'm just going to put it for now, like literally kind of in the sun. Okay. So I'm going to just put this kind of like about there, give or take. Okay. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to literally just draw something. I'm going to draw a square. Oops. I'm going to set this to black. And I'm just going to draw a square like that. Okay. That square has a height and a width, but no depth. Remember that the depth of this, let's say I want to make a cube. A cube is a three-dimensional square. If the cube is going, the cube's depth lines have to go towards the horizon. And in this case, because this is what we would call a 1-point perspective, my depth lines have to go towards the vanishing. Okay, now the easiest way to do this in Adobe Animate is I'm actually just going to grab the line tool and and make sure you don't have object drawing or anything like that. And I'm just going to like literally do this where they're literally going all the way to that vanishing as such. Okay. Now, if you look at this, this is definitely starting to look more three-dimensional, right? Now, I don't want my cube to go all the way off into the distance. So what I'm going to do is let's figure out where does the cube end. Now, in this case, this is not a depth line. It's a height line. And anything that's a height or a width in a 1-point perspective does not go towards the vanishing. So in this case, this is the height of the back wall. And I'm just going to drag it here. I'm going to deliberately intersect these lines, and you'll see why in a second, because it's going to be really easy to delete them. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it like this. Okay. Oops, actually, let me zoom in a little bit. It's hard to get what I want. No. Let's do that. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually delete the unnecessary lines here. So I don't need this line. I'm just going to highlight it. It might be hard to tell in the video, but I've highlighted it. I'm just going to use the delete key and delete it. And I'm just going to go around and delete the unnecessary lines here. That's why I deliberately overlapped them to make it easy to do that. And there you go. There's my cube in space. Okay. Let's pretend there's a door on the side of this cube. Once again, I'm just going to use the line tool. And remember, height and width. So in this case, these are my height lines. In this case, the width of the object or the width of the door is technically depth because it's going backwards in space. So that should also go towards the horizon line. Now this line's already going towards going towards the vanishing point, but I haven't done this one. So this one should go about there. I'm going to extend that. And then once again, I'm just going to select the ones I don't need, like these. Boom, boom, boom. And I want to get rid of that one. All right, and let's get rid of this one. All right, so there's my, building that's in perspective. Okay. Now you can play around with color too. So, maybe I'm going to grab some color. Oops. Normally what you want to do is lighter colors always feel closer and darker colors always feel further away. So to help with depth, I'm actually going to use lighter colors that are towards the camera. And then as they go further away, the color should get a little bit darker. See how that kind of feels a little bit closer. Now you can also apply a gradient too. Gradients would be a really good way to create a more realistic depth, but we're not quite going to talk about that here. That's for another day. But, there you go. There's my three-dimensional house. You know what I mean? Now, it's very simple. I could do more with it, but that's a good starting place. Okay. Let's do that again. I'm going to build another cube, but this time the cube's going to be above the horizon line. Okay. Cube in this case, it's going to be like a Dolly painting. It's going to float in space. Okay. And actually, let's not do a cube. Let's do like a triangle. Let's do something different. So I'm going to set this to be 3 sides. And let's do a triangle just to do a different shape. Okay. And once again, this is the height, this is the width, so they don't go back in space. But I'm going to have these points go towards. Now, all of my objects have to keep the same vanishing point. If I chose a different vanishing point, or I move the vanishing point, or I move the horizon, the objects would be 3D, but they wouldn't feel like they exist in the same scene. Okay. All of your objects have to have the same perspective. And if they're using a 1 point or 2 point or 3 point, which we'll talk about what a 2 point is in a second, you have to keep the same horizon and the same vanishing points. If you start moving those around, they won't feel like they're in the same scene. They'll look 3-dimensional, but they'll feel like you took 2 different objects and you just kind of, combined them. Okay. So there you go. There's that. This is like a little sort of like a pyramid in space. And then I'm going to just draw a line there. In this case, this should also go back because I'm kind of going. This is an interesting one. How do I want to do this? Yeah. This should be that. So this should be the corners there. And now I'm just going to remove these. This is the extra lines there. Okay. Kind of a cube in space. Once again, let's do some lighter colors in the front. And some darker colors in the back. Not great color choices, I have to admit, but I'd go back and fine tune them, but you know, you get the idea. Something like that. Okay. Now, in this case, this object is also floating. So to make it look a little more realistic, you'd probably want like a shadow there. Otherwise, it's going to look like, you know, because in real life, things would have shadows and things like that. But that has more to do with tone. All right, so that's a 1 point perspective. Okay. See how my scene looks a little more real? Definitely looks a lot more real than something like that, where there isn't a depth to your objects. Now, what we did there is a 1 point perspective. Here's another one where this is the horizon line. All the lines are going off into the distance there. Here's some examples you might see in actual cartoons. So like in this case, actually the 1 point perspective is like all, you know, this is from like a Roadrunner cartoon. All of the lines of, these are all like the cliffs. They're all coming kind of towards right about there, give or take. Maybe like there. And so all the, you know, this is a 1 point perspective. Oops. In a 2 point perspective, the concept is still the same. The difference is rather than having one perspective, or sorry, one vanishing point, you have two vanishing points. Okay. Now, the way to understand that is imagine I have the object, I have the box like this. Okay. So this is straight towards the camera. And this side of the box is going off this way to my right, or right of, and this side is going, oops, I'm doing the wrong bit. It's hard to do it backwards, but this side is going over here, right? So really, there's actually two vanishing points. Okay. Usually when people do a 2 point perspective, there's you still have they're still on the horizon line, but there's usually two vanishing points, usually very far from each other on the left and right. It doesn't technically have to be the left and right, it could be the top and bottom, but that's usually how you'll see it. Okay. So in this case, the way it works is you're sort of looking at the building as a corner. Like this is the corner, right? And then half of it's going this way and half of it's going that way. Well, what's going on here is like these are going towards this vanishing point, and then these are going towards that vanishing point. You know what I mean? Does that, so it's like it depends, while this same building, even though it's the same building, the other side is going, you know, this way. Okay. So it's like you're looking at the corner. This is like the corner there. This is the corner you're looking at, and then the other sides are going off in perspective. Okay. So let's do an example of this. Once again, here's like an example, just to give you an idea of kind of what it should look like roughly, but we're going to do our own. And once again, I'm going to draw a line. This is going to be my horizon line. Let's just do it like that. And once again, I need to create some vanishing points, and I'm just going to create two circles. And they have to be on my horizon. So, oops. Let me make just two vanishing points. I'm going to put one of them over here. I'm going to put the other one. Oops. Over here. I didn't have to put them on the ends. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I'll just bring them in a little bit so it doesn't, I don't want people getting confused and thinking they have to be on the end of your line, but okay, there it is. Now let's pretend I have two boxes in space. Okay. So I'm going to draw the boxes with black. So let's draw a line. Now this is like the corner of the box or the building. Okay. This side's going to go off towards that perspective or that vanishing point. This side's going to go off to that vanishing point. Okay. So once again, I'm just going to literally drag the lines all the way there. As such. Okay. Now, once again, it's starting to look a little 3D. Once again, I got to figure out where does the building end. That's a height line. Height lines should be parallel or towards the camera. They should not be in perspective. So I'm doing this. And let's say the building ends here. Now that I've done that, I can kind of just go through and delete all the unnecessary lines here. Okay. So here's my, box in 3D. I'm also, let's add a door. So once again, figure out how tall you want the door to be. Now the depth of the door, so this is already going, actually, let's do a window. I'm not going to do it because I want to have both the top and the bottom. Let's say there's a window on this side of the wall here, and I'm just going to draw a line. This represents the closest point of the window. Now a window is a square, but as it goes in perspective, the bottom part's going to go to here and the top part's going to go to here as such. And then once again, I should figure out where the width is. So, and the height should be towards the camera. So I'm going to say that the window ends here. Now I don't need these lines no anymore. There you go. And there's your window in perspective. Okay. So, you can have windows and doors in perspective. If it's a height line, it should be, parallel. If it's a depth line, it should be going, depending on whether it's facing to the right or facing to the left. Okay, there you go. Let's do another one. We'll do one that's a little more complicated. Let's pretend it's kind of like this, where it's kind of open and facing. All right. I'm going to do one. So we'll do a box. And once again, remember that all of the objects in your scene have to follow the same, or have to have the same vanishing points and horizon lines. So I can't change these, okay? You might want to put those on their own layer and lock them so you don't accidentally move them. I probably should have done that. I apologize, but But anyway, so I have this, and so this side's going to go here. I'm going to make this kind of short too, because you'll see why in a second. So this is going to go, I'm going to put this on another layer so I don't accidentally, I don't want to have to deal with interlocking the lines here with this character or this building. So let's do that. And then this side's going to go this way. This side's going to go this way. Let's turn this one off temporarily. I got to keep it on because that's where this is going to go that way. This is going to go that way. Now I'm going to do a line here and a line here. These are the sides. Okay. Now that I've done that, let's just kind of get rid of some of these extra lines. Now, this line is actually, this back is actually going towards here. Okay. So this point should match up with here, and this point should match up with here. Okay. Because this line is actually following that. This back is following this. So once again, like this should follow that. This should follow that. Okay. Let me get rid of the lines here. Okay. So this is once again an object in space. Okay. And it would help if, I'll choose some colors. Let's choose like a green. Let's do like a light green. Let's pretend you kind of have to decide where the sun source is coming. I'm going to say like this side's going to be lighter and these will be a little darker. Okay. So this is my cube going back in space. Okay. Now you could do some fun stuff here. Maybe there's like I don't know, there's a plant there, whatever. There's some grass. This is you don't, you can use this as a guideline, right? Maybe there's like another tree here, and the height of the trees gets smaller, like there's a fence line. So this is ways you can use perspective to help make the scene look a little more realistic. Okay. Why don't you guys try that out? That was 2 and 3, please.